Be there promptly at 7, wear the blue suit, and for God's sake, don't mention that you work in charity. My father hates that sort of thing. Emma's message was still burning on my phone screen as I drove down the highway leading to Miami's most expensive neighborhood. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from nervousness, but from a contained anger that I struggled to hide. My name is Jim, I'm 32 years old, and in 40 minutes I would be having dinner with the most powerful man in Florida real estate. A man who, according to my girlfriend of 2 years, judged people by their bank accounts and the zip codes where they lived. The fuel gauge had been flashing red for 15 miles. Damn. I was so nervous about dinner that I completely forgot to fill up. The first gas station I saw had a neon sign that flashed Shell against the orange sky of the sunset. I pulled up to the pump and started filling up, obsessively checking my watch. 6:15. I still had time. The navy blue suit Emma insisted I buy was tight across my shoulders, and the tie felt like a noose around my neck. All to impress a man who had already decided to hate me before he even met me. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Excuse me, young man. Could you help me?" I turned and saw a white-haired man with hunched shoulders, wearing a faded plaid shirt and pants that had seen better days. He was holding a worn leather wallet, his hands trembling slightly as he rummaged through the crumpled bills. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" He pointed to a blue Corolla parked at the pump next to him, its tank open. I put gas in, but when I went to pay, well, it looks like I'm a little short. His voice carried a shame that cut my heart. "It's $53. I have 41. I don't know how I miscalculated." I glanced at my car's dashboard. 6:18. Emma would kill me if I was late. Her father would interpret it as disrespect, a lack of character, confirmation of all the prejudices he already had against me. But when I looked back at that man, I saw my own grandfather. I saw the veterans I served every day at the community center where I worked. I saw the dignity of someone who had probably never asked for help in his life. "Don't worry about it," I said, pulling out my wallet. "I'll pay the difference." The relief that crossed his face almost made me cry. No. I can't accept that. You don't even know me." "I don't need to," I replied, handing my card to the clerk. "We've all been in a tight spot." As the young man swiped my card, the old man put his hand on my shoulder. His skin was rough, calloused from work. "You have a good heart, young man. Your parents must have done a good job." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thank you, sir." He walked to his car, but before getting in, he turned around once more. "What's your name, young man?" "Jim. Jim Patterson." He nodded slowly, as if engraving each letter in his memory. "Jim Patterson. I'll remember that." He slowly left the gas station, and I returned to my car, my heart still racing. Not because I was in a hurry, but because of the strange feeling that this encounter meant something more than I could understand. 6:25. I still had time to make it to dinner, but Emma would be furious when she found out I had spent money helping a stranger. According to her, this kind of naive kindness was exactly what her father despised in people of my social class. As I drove through the tree-lined streets of Coral Gables, where mansions stood like monuments to excess, I couldn't get that man's face out of my head. Something about the way he looked at me, the way he repeated my name, seemed too familiar to be a coincidence. If you're enjoying this story of twists and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover more stories that will make you question everything you believe about first impressions. I arrived at Emma's house at 7 o'clock sharp, but I could hardly concentrate on the imposing facade in front of me. Because, without knowing it, I had just met the man who would change my life forever. And when I found out who he really was the next day, I would understand that some tests begin long before we realize we are being evaluated. Richard Blackwood's mansion was exactly what I expected and feared at the same time. 3 stories of Italian marble, gardens that looked like something out of a magazine, and a circular driveway that could fit at least 10 cars like mine. The irony did not go unnoticed. While I had just helped a man who could barely afford $53 worth of gas, I was now stepping into a place where that amount wouldn't even pay for the wine served as an aperitif. Emma was waiting for me at the door, wearing a red dress that cost more than my monthly salary. Her eyes sparkled with nervousness, and for the first time since we met, she seemed more scared than I was. "You're right on time," she whispered, adjusting my tie with quick, precise movements. "Dad's in a good mood today. He closed a $50 million deal this morning. $50 million. I tried not to think about the $12 I had just spent helping a stranger. The man who approached us in the lobby was imposing in a way that went beyond his physical height. Richard Blackwood was 62 years old, with perfectly combed gray hair, a suit that probably cost more than my car, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He radiated power in the coldest way possible. "So you're the famous Jim," he said, extending a hand that squeezed mine with calculated force. "Emma has told me a lot about you." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Blackwood." His eyes scanned me from head to toe like a machine evaluating defective merchandise. The suit Emma made me buy, the words she taught me to say, the conversation topics I memorized during the week. None of it mattered. I could feel his judgment forming in real time. "Emma told me you work in the social sector," he commented in the same tone he would use to talk about a contagious disease. "Yes, sir. I work at a community center, helping veterans and families in vulnerable situations." His smile narrowed. "Admirable. We all need our hobbies." Hobbies. He had just reduced my work, my vocation, my reason for getting up every day, to a pastime. I felt Emma stiffen beside me. "Actually, it's my main career," I corrected him gently. "I've been coordinating social reintegration programs for 8 years. "Ah." He nodded as if feigning interest in a child explaining a scribbled drawing. "And how much does that pay, if I don't mind asking?" The question fell like a stone in still water. Emma whispered my name warningly, but it was too late. $42,000 a year, I replied, keeping my voice steady. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard couldn't hide a smug smile, as if I had confirmed exactly what he expected to hear. "Interesting," he murmured. "Emma spends more than that on shoes." The humiliation burned in my face. Beside me, I felt Emma wilt like a flower touched by frost. She had warned me, had tried to prepare me, but nothing could have prepared me for the casual cruelty with which this man tore people apart. We went to dinner in tense silence. The table could seat 20 people, but there were only the 3 of us, which made every word echo in the air conditioning. The 5 wine glasses in front of me confused me until Emma discreetly whispered which one to use for each course. "Jim," Richard began as he cut his steak with surgical precision, "Emma told me that you two met at a charity event. I assume you were there working." "No, sir. I was there as a guest. Emma and I talked about literature." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Literature. Of course. And tell me, what are your plans for the future? Do you intend to continue this, social work, indefinitely?" The way he said social work made it sound shameful, a life choice that serious people would abandon as soon as they came to their senses. "I plan to open my own center in a few years," I replied. "There is a great need in Miami's Latino community. Many families arrive without resources and—" "Immigrants," he interrupted, as if that explained everything. "There will always be poverty, Jim. The question is whether we want to be part of the solution or perpetuate the problem." I felt my jaw tighten. "With all due respect, sir, I believe that giving people dignity and opportunities is part of the solution." "Dignity doesn't pay the bills," he replied coldly. "And it certainly doesn't support a family. Do you intend to support my daughter with good intentions?" Emma let out an almost inaudible sigh. "Dad, please." "It's a legitimate question, honey. Jim seems like a well-intentioned young man, but good intentions don't maintain the standard of living you're accustomed to." I looked at Emma and saw tears welling up in her eyes. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about me. It was about her, too. It was about the control he exercised over every aspect of her life, about how he used his money as an invisible leash. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, choosing each word carefully, "I respect your concerns about Emma's future. But I believe that a person's worth should not be measured solely by their bank account." He placed his fork on the table with a small metallic click that sounded like a sentence. "How romantic," he said, his tone now icy. "And completely naive. Money may not buy happiness, Jim, but it buys freedom. It buys options. It buys security. Without that, love is just a pretty word people use to justify bad decisions." The rest of dinner passed in an atmosphere of bitter cold. Every attempt at conversation was systematically demolished by Richard, who had turned the act of eating into a masterclass on how to make someone feel small and inadequate. When we finally got up from the table, Richard walked me to the door while Emma went upstairs to get her purse. "Jim," he said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, "you seem like a good guy. Sincere, hard-working, well-intentioned. But my daughter was raised a certain way. She has expectations, needs, a lifestyle that you simply can't provide." I looked him straight in the eye. "What if she's willing to give up some of those things?" He laughed, genuinely amused for the first time that evening. "She may think she is, but trust me, that fantasy doesn't last. The first winter without proper heating, the first time she can't buy something she wants, the first time you have to worry about money, she'll remember the comfort she left behind." His words carried the confidence of someone who had seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. Emma came downstairs, her eyes red but her makeup intact. Richard kissed her forehead with genuine tenderness, the first human moment I witnessed from him all night. "Think about what we talked about, honey," he murmured to her. "You deserve someone who can give you the world." In the car, for the first 20 minutes, neither of us said a word. Emma stared out the window, her hands clasped in her lap, and I drove on autopilot, still processing the systematic humiliation I had just suffered. "He doesn't know you," she finally whispered. "If he really knew you." "He knows me well enough," I replied. "He knows I can't compete with what he offers." "It's not a competition, Jim." I looked at her and saw the woman I loved fighting against years of conditioning, against a voice in her head whispering the same things her father had just said out loud. "It isn't?" I asked gently. "Because it feels like it is. And I'm losing before I even start." She began to cry then, not delicate, silent tears, but deep sobs that shook her whole body. I pulled the car over to the side of the road and held her as she broke down. "I don't want to lose you," she murmured against my chest. "But I don't want to lose you either." And there, holding the woman I loved as she cried, I began to understand that some battles cannot be won with love. Some battles require different weapons. But I didn't yet know that the most powerful weapon was already in my hands, in the form of a memory of an old man at a gas station who knew my name better than I realized. The following Monday, I arrived at the Overtown Community Center with the bitter taste of humiliation still in my mouth. The two-story building, with its peeling paint and noisy air conditioning, had never seemed so small to me as it did at that moment. It was hard not to contrast the plastic chairs in the meeting room with the Italian leather armchairs in the Blackwood mansion. "Jim, are you okay?" asked Maria, our receptionist, when she saw me walk straight to my office without greeting anyone. "You look down." "I'm fine," I lied, closing the door behind me. The truth was that Richard's words echoed in my head like an annoying song I couldn't get out of my mind. 42,000 a year. Emma spends more than that on shoes. I tried to focus on the week's reports, but every 5 minutes my phone vibrated with messages from Emma. "Dad doesn't really know you. He'll change his mind when he gets to know you better. Don't pay attention to what he said about the money." But I knew she was trying to convince herself as much as me. There was something about the way she avoided my eyes throughout breakfast that betrayed her own doubts. Around noon, my routine was interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus Thompson, our oldest war veteran, limped in, leaning on his cane. At 72, he had lost his right leg in Vietnam and his wife to cancer the year before. "Jim, I need to talk to you," he said, sitting heavily in the chair across from my desk. "Sure, Marcus. What can I do for you?" He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "It's about the rent. The landlord is raising it $300 starting next month. I don't know how I'm going to pay it." My stomach clenched. Marcus only received $1,100 a month in military pension. A $300 increase was devastating. "We'll find a solution," I said automatically, but even as I spoke, I knew our options were limited. Our subsidized housing list had an 18-month wait. "Jim," Marcus continued, his voice breaking slightly, "I fought for this country for 3 years. I worked 40 years in the engine factory. And now, at 72, I could end up on the street because someone decided my house is worth more money." The anger I had swallowed during dinner with Richard finally found a target. Was this how the world worked? Men like Marcus, who had given everything for their country, faced eviction while people like Richard Blackwood amassed millions speculating on real estate? "Marcus, give me a few days. I'll find a solution." After he left, I was alone with my turbulent thoughts. I called 3 housing organizations, 2 government programs, and a church that sometimes helped veterans. All the responses were variations on the same theme: we're sorry, but we don't have any resources available at this time. That's when my phone rang. Emma. Jim, I was thinking, maybe you could consider a career change? Dad knows a lot of people in the financial sector. With your educational background, you could easily land a 6-figure position. I was silent for a moment, processing what she was suggesting. Emma, are you asking me to abandon my work? It's not abandoning. It's evolving. Think of how much good you could do with more money. You could donate more, help more people. And leave who to take care of the people I already help. Jim, be realistic. You said yourself that resources are limited. How can you really make a difference with the budget you have? The irony was cruel. At the very moment Marcus needed my help more than ever, the woman I loved was asking me to abandon people like him. Emma, this is my calling. It's who I am. What about me? Where do I fit into this? Do you expect me to live forever as a college student, sharing an apartment and saving up to eat out? For the first time, I heard the real Emma in her voice. Not the passionate woman I met at the charity party, but Richard Blackwood's daughter, conditioned to believe that human value is measured in dollars. I have to go, I said, ending the call. That afternoon, as I drove through the streets of Miami Beach where Emma lived, I looked at the mansions that lined the streets like monuments to excess. Each one cost more than our community center received in 5 years of donations. And there, in that moment of bitter clarity, I made a decision. I would not change careers. I would not become another version of Richard Blackwood. But I would also not continue to be the silent victim of a system that values profit over people. I stopped at a cafe in Wynwood and started writing. Not an elaborate plan for revenge, but a strategy for survival. If Richard wanted to measure value in dollars, I would show him exactly how much human dignity was worth. First note, research Richard Blackwood's business history. Second, contact journalists who cover real estate. Third, document cases like Marcus's. I didn't know yet how I would connect these dots, but I knew that Richard had made a fundamental mistake during our dinner. He assumed I was just another idealistic young man without the resources to fight him. What he didn't know was that 8 years of working with veterans had taught me that the best battles aren't won with money. They're won with truth, persistence, and unexpected allies. As I typed, I remembered the old man at the gas station. His genuine gratitude, the way he held my hand, how he repeated my name. In a world full of Richard Blackwoods, there were still people who understood the value of a simple gesture of kindness. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, I would discover that this chance encounter at the gas station would change everything. That the humble man I helped was not just a stranger in need, but someone with the power to completely turn the tables on Richard Blackwood. And when that revelation came, I would finally understand that sometimes the universe has a sense of poetic justice that surpasses even the most elaborate plans for revenge. For now, I had work to do. And an entire system to challenge. I spent all Tuesday at the community center, but my mind was elsewhere. Between assisting veterans and organizing donations, I discreetly researched Richard Blackwood on my phone. What I found made me question whether Emma really knew the man she called her father. Richard Blackwood Development had built its empire by buying properties in historic Miami neighborhoods, evicting low-income families, and turning everything into luxury condominiums. In 15 years, he had gentrified 3 entire neighborhoods, always following the same pattern: buy low, pressure long-time residents to leave, and sell high to investors. "Jim, you seem distracted today," Maria observed as we sorted through clothing donations. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just thinking about a few things." But I wasn't fine. With every article I read about Richard, I became more outraged. There was a report from 2 years ago about a family of veterans evicted from a house they had occupied for 20 years. The property was sold to Blackwood Development for a pittance, demolished, and turned into a parking lot for a shopping mall. My phone vibrated. Emma again. "Jim, Dad wants to invite us to dinner again on Friday. He said he might have an interesting proposal for you." A proposal. As if I were a product being negotiated. What kind of proposal? I texted back. He knows people in the financial sector. Positions that pay well. "Jim, this could be our chance." Our chance for what? For me to become another Richard Blackwood, measuring human value in dollars? Over lunch, I decided to call Tom Rodriguez, an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald who covered real estate corruption. I had known Tom since college, where we studied together before going our separate ways. Jim Patterson, Tom said when he answered. How long has it been? 5 years. About that. Tom, I need a favor. Have you ever investigated Blackwood development? There was a pause. Richard Blackwood? Why do you want to know? It's complicated. Let's just say I have a personal interest in the matter. Jim man, Blackwood is untouchable. He has lawyers who cost more per hour than my monthly salary. And political connections that go all the way to Washington. What are you up to? Nothing yet. I just want to understand how he operates. Tom sighed. Look, off the record, I've tried to investigate him 3 times in the last few years. Whenever I get close to something concrete, my editors get calls. Pressure to focus on other stories. Blackwood has a well-organized scheme to silence critics. What kind of scheme? Donations to newspapers, strategic advertising, favors for editors. Nothing illegal, but effective. He buys silence without getting his hands dirty. I hung up with more information than I expected. Richard wasn't just cruel, he was systematic. He had built a machine to protect his reputation while destroying lives. That afternoon, while helping Marcus fill out forms for subsidized housing, an idea began to form. Marcus had mentioned that the landlord who raised his rent was selling to a development company. What if? Marcus, do you remember the name of the company that bought your building? He thought for a moment. Something with black in the name. Blackwood, I think. My blood ran cold. Richard Blackwood wasn't just the man who humiliated me over dinner. He was actively evicting people like Marcus, veterans who had served their country and now could barely scrape by. Marcus, did you keep any documents about the sale? I have some papers at home. Why? Can you bring them tomorrow? I think I can help more than I thought. That night, Emma showed up at my apartment unannounced. She was crying, her makeup smudged, holding a half-empty bottle of wine. My mom called today, she said, throwing herself on my couch. She said Dad is investigating you. Checking your background, your finances, your friends. Investigating how? I'm not sure. But he hired someone to find out things. Jim, he's trying to find something to convince me to leave you. I felt anger burning in my chest. And you? What do you think about that? She looked at me with red eyes. I told him I didn't care what he found. That I loved you regardless of your past or your bank account. And him. He laughed. He said love doesn't pay for plastic surgery bills or private school tuition for his grandchildren. I hugged Emma as she cried, but part of me disconnected emotionally. For the first time, I could see our situation clearly. It wasn't just about Richard accepting me. It was about Emma choosing between 2 irreconcilable worlds. Emma, if you had to choose between me and your father's approval, what would you do? She stopped crying and looked at me, the question hanging in the air like a bomb about to explode. Why are you making me choose? Because your father has already made his choice. He will never accept me, no matter what I do. The question is whether you can live with that reality. She was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. I need time to think. After she left, I sat at my dining room table with a cup of coffee and began to organize everything I had discovered about Richard. If he wanted to investigate my life, I would do the same to his. I opened my laptop and created a detailed document. Properties acquired, families evicted, political connections, methods of silencing the press. Each piece of information was a piece of a larger puzzle. Around midnight, I remembered the man at the gas station. His genuine gratitude, the way he held my hand, how he repeated my name as if it were important. In a world full of Richard Blackwoods, that moment of simple humanity gave me hope. I picked up my phone and started typing a message to Tom. Tom, what if I told you I had access to inside information about questionable practices at Blackwood Development? Information your editors couldn't ignore. The reply came in 3 minutes. What kind of information? Veterans being systematically evicted. Possible manipulation of subsidized housing contracts. And a pattern of legal intimidation against vulnerable families. Jim, this is serious. Do you have proof? Not yet. But I will. If you're following this story of one man fighting a corrupt system, subscribe to the channel to find out how justice sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. I hung up the phone and looked out the window of my apartment. Outside, Miami slept under neon lights and dreams of easy riches. But somewhere in this city, an old man was sleeping peacefully, unaware that our brief conversation at a gas station had planted the seed of something much bigger. Because while Richard Blackwood slept in his mansion, protected by lawyers and connections, I was awake, planning. And when the sun rose, I would begin to discover that some people have much more power than they appear to have. And sometimes, helping a stranger at a gas station can change the fate of everyone involved in ways no one could ever imagine. On Wednesday morning, Marcus arrived at the community center with a yellowed folder under his arm and an expression that mixed hope and despair. The documents he brought confirmed my worst fears. Blackwood Development had systematically purchased 17 properties in veteran neighborhoods over the past 2 years, always using the same strategy of abusive rent increases followed by forced evictions. Jim, I found something else, Marcus said, pulling a piece of paper from the bottom of the folder. A letter that arrived yesterday. They're offering me $500 to leave voluntarily by Friday. $500. For a man who lost his leg defending his country, who worked 40 years paying taxes, who now depended on $1,100 a month to survive. The casual cruelty made me clench my fists. Marcus, do you trust me? He nodded without hesitation. Then don't sign anything. And get ready, because things are about to get interesting. I spent the afternoon calling every veteran I knew, documenting similar cases. The pattern was clear. Richard identified properties with elderly or veteran tenants, bought them through intermediaries, raised the rents beyond what was affordable, and offered paltry sums for voluntary exits. Tom Rodriguez arrived at the office at 5 in the afternoon with a grim expression. He had brought a camera and a digital recorder. Jim, this is bigger than I imagined, he said, spreading documents across my desk. I was able to confirm it through sources in the housing department. Blackwood Development has evicted more than 200 families in the last 3 years. Veterans, seniors, single-parent families. Always the most vulnerable. And you can publish this? With the right evidence, yes. But I need something my editors can't ignore. Something that will turn this into a national scandal, not just a local one. That's when my phone rang. Emma. Jim, Dad wants to have dinner with us tomorrow. He said he has a proposal that will change our lives. A proposal. On the same day that Marcus' eviction papers would expire. Emma, I need to ask you something. Do you know everything about your father's business? Of course not. Why? What if I told you he's evicting war veterans to build luxury condominiums? Silence. Then her voice, uncertain, Jim, don't start with conspiracy theories. It's not a theory. I have documents. My father wouldn't do that. He's many things, but he's not cruel to veterans. I hung up knowing that Emma was as deluded as I had been about who Richard really was. The difference was that I had seen the truth. She still chose to believe the lie. On Thursday evening, I arrived at the Blackwood mansion with a discreet briefcase under my arm. Emma was waiting for me at the door, nervous but smiling. Dad's excited to talk to you, she said, adjusting my tie. He spends all day talking about opportunities in the financial sector. Richard welcomed me into his office this time, an even more intimidating environment than the dining room. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookcases, framed diplomas, photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. And in the center, a desk where life-changing contracts were probably signed. Jim, have a seat, he said, gesturing to a leather armchair. I want to make you an offer. I sat down, keeping the folder on my lap. I've talked to some contacts in the financial sector. There's an opening at an investment brokerage firm. Starting salary of $120,000, plus commissions. In 2 years, you'll be making $300,000 easily. $300,000. 7 times my current salary. And what would I need to do? Investment sales. You're educated, articulate, and inspire confidence. Best of all, you'd be working with people like us. People who understand how the world really works. People like us? He leaned forward conspiratorially. Jim, you seem too smart to be wasting your time with losers. Veterans, dysfunctional families, recovering addicts. These people will never change. You can't save those who don't want to be saved. What if I like my current job? Richard laughed, that dry sound I was learning to hate. Liking it doesn't pay the bills. And frankly, Jim, it's not sustainable. How do you intend to support Emma on $42,000 a year? How do you plan to give her the life she deserves? That was my cue. I opened the folder and placed the documents on his desk. Richard, before you answer, I'd like you to look at this. He looked down at the papers, and his expression gradually changed. First confusion, then recognition, finally calculated coldness. Where did you get this? Public records. Eviction papers. Purchase and sale agreements. All legal, all accessible to anyone who knows where to look. He leafed through the documents slowly, his mind clearly calculating the implications. And what exactly do you think this proves? It proves that you are systematically evicting war veterans to build luxury properties. It proves that your wealth is built on the suffering of people who served this country. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes now icy. Jim, you don't understand how the world works. These veterans are going to end up on the streets anyway. At least this way they get some money before they inevitably fail again. The casual cruelty of the statement took my breath away. Richard, you're talking about human beings. I'm talking about economic reality. And apparently you need a lesson in it. He pressed a button on the phone. Send Mr. Harrison over here. 2 minutes later, a man in a suit walked into the office. Tall, gray hair, unmistakable military bearing. Jim, Richard said with a cruel smile, I'd like you to meet William Harrison, my security consultant. Former Army colonel, specialist in solving problems. Harrison looked at me with cold eyes. Mr. Patterson, right? I hear you have an interest in matters that are none of your concern. Actually, a familiar voice said from the doorway, I think they are exactly his business. We all turned around. Standing in the doorway was the old man from the gas station. But now, wearing an impeccable suit, standing tall, his eyes shining with an authority I hadn't noticed before, he looked like a completely different person. Richard turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. Senator Hutchinson, he stammered. I didn't know you were in town. Senator. The man I had helped at the gas station was a senator. The senator walked over to me and extended his hand. Jim Patterson. I believe we've met. Although at the time I didn't properly introduce myself. I shook his hand, still processing the revelation. Senator Robert Hutchinson, he said for my benefit. Chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. And Richard, he turned to my host, who now seemed to have shrunk into his chair, it seems we have a lot to talk about. The change in atmosphere was instantaneous. Harrison discreetly backed away. Richard tried to regain his composure, but his voice trembled slightly. Senator, how nice to see you. If I had known you were coming. Don't worry, Richard. This is an official visit. The senator glanced at the documents scattered on the table. I see Mr. Patterson has already begun documenting his real estate operations. Richard followed his gaze and his face paled even further. Senator, I can explain. I'm sure you can. And you'll have the opportunity. My committee will be launching a formal investigation into predatory practices against veterans in the Miami area. It appears that Blackwood Development will be our first case study. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Richard frantically calculating, searching for a way out that didn't exist. Jim, the senator turned to me, that $53 you paid on Monday? Considering the circumstances, I think it was the best investment anyone has ever made in the city of Miami. Richard looked from me to the senator, understanding finally dawning on him. You planned this? The senator smiled kindly. Young man, when you live as many years as I have, you learn to recognize true character when you see it. And you also learn that sometimes the best way to expose corruption is to disguise yourself as a victim. You've been investigating him from the beginning? For months. But I needed someone with direct access, someone I could trust completely. Someone who demonstrated the kind of character that cannot be bought or intimidated. I looked at Richard, who was visibly sweating now. And now? The senator consulted his watch. Now, Richard, you have until Friday to revoke all pending evictions of veterans. Until Monday to establish a compensation fund for families already displaced. And until the end of the month to appear before my committee in Washington to explain exactly how you built your fortune. And if I refuse? Then we'll find out together if federal prison has adequate accommodations for corrupt real estate developers. Richard opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Senator, maybe we can come to an agreement. The agreement, Richard, is for you to do the right thing. For the first time in years. At that moment, Emma appeared at the office door. Dad, dinner is. Jim? Senator Hutchinson? What's going on here? The senator looked at her with compassion. Miss Blackwood, your father and I were discussing your future participation in our efforts to protect American veterans. Isn't that right, Richard? Richard nodded miserably. Emma looked confusedly from one person to another, clearly feeling that she had missed something crucial. But I knew the explanations would come later. For now, I was savoring the expression on Richard Blackwood's face, the expression of a man who had just realized he had lost everything by underestimating the kindness of a stranger. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a perfect sense of poetic justice. 3 months later, Richard Blackwood was sitting in a hearing room in Washington, sweating under the lights of the television cameras. The Senate Veterans Affairs Committee had become a public nightmare for him. Mr. Blackwood, Senator Hutchinson said with quiet authority, 17 veteran families have been evicted in 6 months. How do you justify that? Richard mumbled something about standard business practices, but his words were lost in the indignant murmur of the crowded audience of veterans and journalists. Marcus was in the front row, wearing his only dress shirt, his service medal gleaming on his chest. When our eyes met, he nodded gratefully. Emma had broken up with me 2 weeks after the revelation. I can't be with someone who destroyed my father, she said, even though we knew Richard had destroyed himself. Mr. Patterson, the senator called me as the lead witness, can you tell us about your first encounter with Mr. Blackwood? I recounted that humiliating night, every cruel word Richard had said about veterans being losers destined for failure. The silence in the room was absolute. At the end of the hearing, Richard lost all government contracts. His company went bankrupt within 2 months. The properties were transferred to a veterans' housing fund. Marcus received not only his house back, but compensation that ensured his comfort for the rest of his life. As for me, the senator offered me a position as a federal advisor on Veterans Affairs. He tripled my salary and gave me the resources to help thousands of people. Jim, the senator said after the last hearing, $53 was truly the best investment in American history. 6 months later, I opened the Hutchinson Center for Veterans in Miami, a housing and reintegration complex that served 500 families. Richard showed up at the ceremony, thinner, gray-haired, driving a used sedan. He watched me from afar throughout the event, but didn't approach. When our eyes met for the last time, I no longer saw the arrogant man who had humiliated me at that dinner. I saw only someone who had lost everything by confusing wealth with value. Emma was there too, working as a volunteer. We didn't talk, but we exchanged a knowing glance. Some lessons we only learn when we lose what we thought was essential. That night, as I watched veterans moving into their new homes, I remembered Richard's words, "You can't save those who don't want to be saved." He was wrong. Not about the people I served, but about himself. During my speech, I looked out at the audience filled with families who now had hope again and said, sometimes a small act of kindness at the right moment can change the fate of hundreds of people. If this story of how kindness can overcome cruelty has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about justice, revenge, and transformation that will restore your faith in humanity. Because in the end, I discovered that the best revenge is not to destroy your enemy, but to build something so beautiful that it renders their cruelty irrelevant. Richard tried to teach me that money is worth more than decency. Instead, I learned that decency builds riches that money can never buy.